of try and steelman YouTube's position in terms of the rhetoric that you're putting across, but it would appear that you're kind of at a little bit of a loss as to what that could be.
Well, so the big question that occurs in society is to some degree economic. It's to some degree educational. The big question is, why do some people do well and why do some people do badly? Right? Like, you know how it goes in sports, in music, other disciplines. Like 95% of the money goes to 5% of the people. You know, like for every Queen or Rolling Stones or insert modern artist here that I'm not aware of, you know, there are, 1,000 garage bands who never seem to get out of the pub circuit, right? And it's a big question. And people from the days of the pre-Socratics onwards have been wrestling with this question of like, okay, why do East Asians make more than whites? Why do why do some basketball players do really well and others don't? Like, it's a huge question. Now, the Marxists have an answer. The leftists have an answer, which is it's
Street B. Street B. And in this corner, we come to the mill, you get a distance, Daddy. There we go.
It's exploitation. You know, the reason that the capitalist makes more money than his workers is because their work is worth $15 an hour, but he only pays them $14 an hour, so he pockets that extra dollar, and he gets rich by stealing from them. He's not necessary. They're the ones doing the actual work. He's just sitting in the office in his bathrobe counting his money that he's stolen from the workers. And so their answer as to why some people do better and why some people do worse is exploitation. It's basically theft. It's called the labor theory of value, and you're probably aware of all this kind of stuff. Now, is there exploitation? Of course there is. Absolutely. I pay my taxes every year. I don't seem to get a whole lot in return. But there really is exploitation, but there are other answers. Now, one of the big competing answers is IQ. You know, in that the higher someone's sort of raw IQ scores, the closer it correlates with success, particularly economic success. It doesn't actually correlate with happiness, which is interesting because the goal of philosophy is happiness, not wealth. In fact, wealth can sometimes take you in the opposite direction. You know, everybody who wins the lottery regrets it a year later when all the extended relatives feast on their bones, right? So the answer around IQ is an important part of the equation. But if you raise the answer called IQ, IQ is statistically, for success in a complex job, your IQ score is 80% correlated. It's a correlation of 0.8, more or less. So it's way better than a college degree. It's way better than interviews. So just, have an IQ test. And they're getting to the point where you can literally spit into a jar and they can get your IQ from that. I mean, it's becoming quite wild because like 80% genetic by your teens, right? So the IQ answer is really, really interesting and has really fascinated me. And I've talked about that. And that is offensive to some people for, I think, pretty obvious reasons. But it's particularly offensive to the Marxists because it's a highly competing theory. Because the more you start looking into the IQ argument, the more the theft and exploitation argument appears weaker. And Marxists use the theft and exploitation argument to create division, to cause problems, and then eventually to, salami slice society and gain power over the whole sausage fest, so to speak. And so, I know.
That's a term I didn't think I was going to hear today, Stefan. This is what happens when you get kicked off YouTube. You start throwing words like sausage fest around.
So, I know, I also break my rule, which is to never do an interview with people who've got cooler glasses than me. But anyway, see, look at I even brought my ones down that have tape on them. That's my professionalism, because they're not on my face. So good. So the more you focus on the IQ argument, again, exploitation exists, but IQ is a really, really important part of the discussion, but it weakens the Marxist, the capitalist is stealing from the poor workers and exploiting them and creating all of this resentment and rage, because, I mean, we've all been there. I grew up poor. I don't know about your history in particular, but, you see, there were kids in my high school. I remember these two guys, they were brothers. They got brand new Corvettes for their 16th birthday, and they drove them to school, and they parked, and of course, everybody was going crazy, and the girls were like, and I'm sitting here with my dirt bike of 7 colors, you know, and it's like they got to get it all from the garbage dump. But it's like, I am not getting any babes with this multicolored Adam Sanders kind of dirt bike. So we all have that now. And I remember, you know, going to people's houses, you know, like they're wealthy and they got pools and, you know, that old speech, there's lots of people out there, they're happy and they have noodle salads, just nobody in this car, right? And so we have that kind of resentment. Now, for me, it was kind of like, well, I'm glad that's out there. I got something to shoot for. You know, I got something to aim for. I got something where I can get out of this hellhole of poverty and dysfunction. Because, you know, the poorer you are, often more dysfunctional the systems and situations are. I had something, you know, like if you're down a well and it's totally black, that's pretty bad. If you can see one pinpoint of light up there, woohoo, you know, you've got, you know, it may take you a long time, but you can climb the hell out of that thing, right? So for me, I did kind of resent it, but I used the resentment as I resent that I don't have that, right? So I worked very hard. I co-founded
the system which permitted that to emerge.
Well, yeah, because if I'd have thought to myself, oh, well, you know, because you're born poor, you lack the contacts and you lack the social skills and you lack the work ethic and you got dysfunctional parents which you have to take care of. And that bleeds you out of the marketplace and the rich will never let you get ahead. Or like all of this stuff. I had to drill upwards. You know, you think of a guy who falls through. I live in Canada, so these things are like you think about these things occasionally. You fall through the ice, right? And there's a swift flowing current, and then you're under the ice. What the hell do you do? Your body heat is like leaching away, Leo DiCaprio style, and you've got this, you know, half a foot thick ice. And everybody thinks, okay, I could try and swim back up current and find the hole where I came from, but that's pretty risky. Or maybe I can grab a rock from the bottom of the river and I can smash it upwards and get through this ice. And I have maybe 30 seconds or I'm going to die, right? And then, of course, even if you get through the ice, you then got to get out because it's kind of broken where you did it. So the reason I'm saying all of that is that looking up, it was like this layer of ice. Like this layer of ice. It's like, okay, I know on the others, like down here is horrible, right? Down here in the dregs of society, that's pretty wretched, right? But I got to pound my way up through there. And it's a really, really uncomfortable situation because you really do feel out of place. Like I remember giving business presentations. I don't know whether I'm supposed to stand or sit and you're being invited to country clubs and let's go golfing is like, I don't even know which end of the golf club to hold. And like, it's a big, difficult challenge. But I never thought that there was, you know, some people say, oh, well, it's white privilege and so on. But fun, because I know a lot of my friends who didn't make it out. And, you know, they were just as white as me, if not whiter. And so to me, that class question, I never thought it was fixed. Now, I like the Dickens novels. I like Russian novels where there's kind of churn of classes, you know, like the Great Expectations style, the David Copperfield style, even the Oliver Twist style, right? So I think I never really bought into this argument or this idea that you were just trapped, you know, like that old Everlast song, like where you end is usually where you start. And it's like, no, I don't believe that. And I think the more they can get you to believe that, the more you just die under the ice because you think like, I can't get out of here, right? The ice is like a glacier, like I can't get out. And I really, really dislike that, which is why, you know, I focus on free will and fight back against determinism and so on, particularly economic determinism. If you can provide value to people, they don't care whether you're black or white or green or bald or blue-eyed or you have one of those David Bowie rolling casino eyeballs, like what, mix and match and all. If you can provide value, then people will, you know, build a better mousetrap and people will beat a path through it. I always believed that. And I was able to find a place of providing value through philosophy to people, both by talking about things that other people were kind of too chicken to talk about, Douglas Murray accepted. And also, you know, just I have these call-in shows, which I've been doing for like 15 years. I've talked to thousands and thousands of people, you know, people who say, I got this problem in my life. Okay, let's see what philosophy can say. Because I really want it to be a rubber on the road discipline, not some abstract thing in a book or a university.
It's interesting hearing about the problems that a meritocratic society brings up. And Alain de Botton, who I went to go and see twice last year, actually, and was fantastic both times. The most calming, beautiful British voice ever. And he's got this story where he talks about the ancient Greeks, and he says that back then the beggars on the street were referred to as the unfortunates, that Lady Fortuna had not blessed them. And he says, well, if you roll the clock forward now to the 21st century, the equivalent of an unfortunate in our modern society is a loser. someone that's a loser, right?
I like the incel slur, right? Yeah.
It's because, and the reason was, he postulates that back in ancient Greece, people understood that a significant amount of what was good in life could be achieved through hard work with luck. And yet, as you start to ramp up the amount of meritocracy that you have, if the winners, the people, the millionaires, the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates of this world, if their successes are theirs to bear, then the people who fail in society, their failures must be theirs to bear, right? You can't have it that the people who do well because they do well and they've worked hard, but the people who fail purely because of luck. And when you have Douglas Murray on the show talked about the collapse of grand narratives as someone who has an interesting view on religion from his side. He took a really nuanced position about how us no longer having an attachment to these grand narratives, and that's trickled down into a lack of community, both like sort of hyper locally, as in you and your street and the couple of neighborhoods around you. All of these different things is this lack of connection to the outside world, that sense of perspective that you get when you look up at the night sky, the fact that you have super normal levels of dopamine coming in from high stimulus devices, which again kind of makes nature just feel a bit dumb, like I can go and shoot people on Call of Duty, this feels a bit shit. You kind of wrap all these things together, and it does, meritocracy, someone not doing too good in life and feeling like it's a bit unfair. Like, I can see why someone might scrabble around for a reason to kind of work that out. And yet I can hold in truth at the same time that I can see with all of these different structures and how they're going on as to how this could have emerged. Does that all make sense?
It really does. And, one of the great gifts that Christianity gave to the West was a powerful way of dealing with the resentment of people who don't succeed. I mean, it's a powerful force in society. And of course, it's complicated. I mean, it's hugely complicated. As you point out, someone born with spina bifida is going to have a bit more of a challenge in life than say you or I, and I have great sympathy for that. And there are people who try and fail through no particular fault of their own. And so, life is a hurly-burly, but, material success is only one part of life once you've got your bare minimum taken care of. So the question of why people succeed or why they fail is really, really fascinating. But every time we try to answer that using structure, we destroy free will. That's the problem I have. Every time we make an excuse, so to speak, oh, so-and-so failed because, like, I have a friend. Oh, man, let's get all kinds of personal, right? So I had a friend, he's like 5'4", right? And he never had much confidence with women. Now, why? Because he's like, hey, Steph, you can have all the confidence you want, you tall, square-jawed, blue-eyed, almost 6 foot tall guy. You're above average in height and you've got a cool accent and all that kind of stuff, right? And he's like, I'm a 5'4" and, not particularly striking looking or anything like that. And he would bring up these things. He'd say, I saw this show where women were offered a short guy who was a doctor or a tall guy who was unemployed, and they chose the tall guy who was unemployed. And then they finally said, okay, he's a doctor, he writes children's books, he's musical, and he's a millionaire. And finally they were like, okay, fine, I'll go out with the short guy, right? So he said, like, the amount of accomplishments you have to stand on to just make up for height.
Mechanism has to be significantly greater. Okay.
Now, I get all of that. And I could have gone that same route when I was like 13 and started losing my hair. I'm just saying it wasn't 13, but it's pretty damn early, right? And I had a real nice, a hostile shock of hair and all that. But, genetics kicked in. Thanks, Mom. And next thing you know, I'm reflecting more sunlight than I'm absorbing, right? So I could have sat there and said, but bald guys, they don't, right? But if it's the kind of thing, if you believe it, it becomes true. If you don't believe it, you'll find out how true it is. And that's what I want to get across to people. Do not cut off your own future by assuming that there's a structure or you have a deficiency or an issue that is going to prevent you from reaching your potential. Pretend that there's no barriers to what you want to do. You will absolutely be astounded, because in life, you're competing with people who are erecting their own barriers all the time. And if you're just one of these insane people who are like, hey, what if there weren't any barriers? Now, sure, barriers will come up, but what if you're like, okay, well, this is just temporary. This is a barrier like you're driving along and you see a fog bank. You don't crash, you just slow down, right? You navigate the barrier and you just keep moving forward. And if you look at life that way, that's the complete opposite of what the Marxist worldview is. And that's empowering. The Marxist worldview is like this satanic temptation to externalize all the issues in your life to other structural blah, 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 right? Oh, the class or the race or the gender or whatever it is.
So
Go ahead.
I think that this is why I've had to do so much work to get myself up to the level where I can even hold a conversation with someone like Douglas Murray or Andrew Doyle. Because for me, I'm an only child, and therefore sort of personal sovereignty, individual agency, like that's been everything. Playtime required individual agency from me, you know? Because there's no momentum to overcome the inertia of someone else, of you not playing. It's like, I want to play. Okay, right. Well, looks like you're going to have to start playing. And it takes a lot of work for me to get myself into the mindset of someone who does externalize in that way, who does want to rely on the structures. And yet I have a level of empathy which is so crippling that I don't want to see people in our society that are struggling not cared for. And holding those two things in reality at the same time is challenging.
And that's really the key point. Our capacity to empathize with suffering without relieving it for our own sake. Because empathy is what's good for the other person, right? Take a silly example, right? You got your brother's an alcoholic, he asks you to go and pick him up at 2-4, right? Well, empathy is my brother really wants to drink, right? And you're empathizing with your brother's needs. But real empathy for your brother is, dude, you drink too much. Like, let's have a conversation about cutting back, right? So when it comes to sympathy in society, are we actually helping people, or are we managing our own discomfort about them being unhappy? That's the fundamental question, because it's very selfish to say, I don't like that this person is suffering, so I'm going to, walk up and give them money or whatever, because I feel uncomfortable. That's a fundamentally selfish act, and so open to manipulation, and so open to being preyed upon, and so open to having the opposite effect of what you want.
Well, what is the strategy then? Because if you go up to someone and you just say, hey man, like there's that, I can't remember what the comedy show is that's a sketch. It might be Family Guy, and there's a homeless person on the side of the road, and Peter Griffin goes up and he puts an empty hand in there. And they say, but Dad, you didn't give him anything. And he says, hope. I put hope in there. And you're like, well, maybe, you know.
Well, let me ask you this. So have you in your life, I mean, I know you have, obviously, right? But so, Chris, what has your experience been of trying to help someone? Because we all do. We all have people in our lives who have problems, and we try to help them with those problems, just as they try to help us with our problems. What has your experience been in helping people, like directly in your life? Not just, money or taxes or charity, but in your life, sitting down and really trying to help people fix their stuff.
A lot of the young guys that work for me in my events company, between 18 and 21, very turbulent time. A lot of them have relationships, challenges. People have more relationships than they do lectures sometimes at university, and assisting them to navigate that is a very common way that I deal one-to-one with someone who is in some form of emotional distress.
And how does it play out? What would you say your success rate is? I know it's kind of off the cuff, but I'm just curious.
Pretty good, I'd say. At least, it depends on what the quantifiable metric of success is. But at the very least, I think the boys get some clarity. I think they're given clarity because I'm able to say, look, man, here's some of the archetypes that you're going through. Here are some of the existing examples I can give you from my own life or from other people's anonymously lives that have come before you, this weird heritage thing that's going on of different club promoters. And this is just par for the course. It's totally normal. How can we normalize this? How do you feel? What's good? What's bad? And then hopefully they go away with a little bit more clarity. I think it's successful in that they leave in a better position than when they arrived. But even my wisdom-making powers can't fix a bad relationship,
No, there's no magic that way. And it's funny because I've actually had a lot more success helping people in the world than helping people in my personal life, which is causal in ways that are probably quite complex. Because, of course, the people who want to get advice from me or want to get advice from you, there's already some kind of respect that's kind of baked into the situation. So you have some weight, perhaps, that otherwise a stranger wouldn't. But it is really tough to help people. You want to help people, but helping them will often weaken them. You know, like some guy's struggling with lifting weights. You don't go over and say, here, I'll lift those for you. You know, it makes him weaker, right? And you got to let him struggle. If he's not struggling, he's not strengthening. And if he's, you know, struggling too much, he's going to injure himself. Finding that sweet spot, you know, helping people is really complicated. And, you know, one of the issues I have with the welfare state or sort of government redistribution of it's just like, take money from these people, fire money at these people. Look, problem solved, as they say in England, done and dusted. And that doesn't work. I mean, that seriously does not work. And it really just turns into pay people not to get upset, not riot and buy votes. And, you know, it turns into this complete clusterfrack of incompetence and corruption. But because it's not voluntary, because it's coercive, it's based on debt and taxes and so on, you know, you can't really fix it. And so that question of how we help people, it's really complicated. And when you have an overly simple and coercive, quote, solution to a highly complicated problem, people stop looking for answers. You know, how do you help people who are poor? Do you mentor them? Do you give them a better education? Do you reform schools? Do you try to remind people that staying together for your children is probably a good idea if it's not an outright toxic relationship? What do you do to solve the problem of underperformance by individuals or groups within a society? That's a big question. Now, to me, the simplest answers are always the worst answers. Always the worst answers. And it's like saying, well, what song should you play? Chopsticks, forever. It's really not learning very much, right? And so when it comes to helping people in society, I want as many, you know, smart people and creative people. I want lots of different experiments occurring, so to speak, lots of different options and ways of doing things so that we can figure out what works the best. Because I'm not even convinced that pouring a lot of resources into helping people, I mean, outside perhaps of direct medical issues, like, is actually helping them or not. Because, you know, a lot of people
with the current pathways of help at the moment is what you mean.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But so a lot of people, you know, they're kind of starved for attention. You know, I say this as the guy who's got 300 million views. Maybe I'm one of them, right? But a lot of people are kind of starved for attention. And the more attention and resources you give to people who are failing, so to speak, they may then be succeeding because they're getting a lot of attention. And they know that as soon as they actually succeed, all of that attention will be withdrawn. So it's really complicated to help people. And, you know, we just have this one-size-fits-all income redistribution stuff that goes on. I mean, I know it buys a lot of votes, and I know it disrupts a lot of families, and I know it creates multi-generations of people who've never really seen a job application. But, you know, and of course, to even raise that, and people have this other simplistic thing. It's like, well, you know, if the government doesn't do it, it just isn't going to get done, which is kind of like saying, well, if we free the slaves, we're all going to starve to death because no one's going to pick the food. No one's going to pick the cotton. We'll be frozen and hungry in a wilderness.
Society naturally sort of finds a new level point, right? I think it's Huerter that talks about that swing from one extreme to the other that happens with societies.
Sorry to interrupt, but this is something, I don't mean to shoehorn this in here, but I've been thinking about this for a couple of days, and I'll keep this short. I mean, so, you know, for those of you who don't know, I want a stateless society, right? I'm not chipping away at the edge of the welfare. I want a purely voluntary free market society. I think that governments are like slaves, slave owners, and it's just an historical anachronism that we've inherited. And the reason I'm saying all of that is that whenever I say to people, oh, you know, we should fundamentally change things in society, people are like, oh, but there's no way we could adapt. There's no way we could change it. We just had this absolutely mind-boggling experiment that just occurred over the last couple of months, Chris. Truly insane. Like, imagine you go back to what everyone prefers as their safe game year, 2019, right? Let's say you go back to 2019, right? And I say to you, like, we're having this conversation a year ago. Hey, it might even have been on my YouTube channel. Who knows? But we're having this conversation and I say, you know what's going to happen next year? And people will adapt to it pretty well. Half the population is going to be thrown out of work and all the schools are going to be closed for 6 months. And you sit there thinking, oh my God, what an unbelievably wrenching, chaotic, insane thing to happen in society. Borders will be closed, immigration's put to a stop, schools are shut down, malls are shut down, half the businesses closed down. And you'd sit there and think, oh, that's like an unbelievably wrenching change, second only perhaps to the declaration of a national war. And yet, look how adaptable we are. And of course, I mean, there has been a lot of suffering, there's been a lot of loss of income and all of that. But we can do amazing things. Like if they shut down government schools tomorrow, there'd be back a week of chaos. People would be teaching other people in their garage, and then we'd find a solution that would be, it's like taking the government away and thinking there's no more solutions. It makes as much sense as, you cross a river, you take out a giant rock and you think that the water's just still going to go around the hole. Like, no, where there's a need and the government is not providing, you get a much better solution because it's voluntary. Again, let's go back even further. Let's go back to like 1850, you and I having a debate, right? And you say to me, you know what? Slavery is an immoral institution. And I said, well, come on, man. Every society's had slaves. Slavery is a permanent human institution. We've always had it. We always will have it. And by the way, we can't get any cotton or can't have any possible food for the cities if there's no slavery. And I said to you, no, man. See, what you need to get is this. We're going to eliminate slavery, right? And then do you know what's going to happen? These giant robots are going to sweep back and forth across the fields. And they're going to be powered by crushed dinosaur juice. And there's going to be this incredible swath. And right now, 90% of people are involved in farming. But you know what, Chris? In 100 years, it's only going to be 3%. Because giant robots with ancient tree juice in their veins will be sweeping all of the crops. And you say, well, what about the grapes? We'll have robots for them too. And tomatoes and strawberries. And you'd say, okay, first of all, I'm never smoking what you're smoking. And secondly, robots is just a magic term that you use so that you don't actually have to answer how things are going to be done in the absence of slaves. And then I'm going to say, when we get rid of slaves, the most amazing thing is going to happen. Because labor is now expensive. People are going to start investing in labor-saving devices, the likes of which you've never seen before. Because right now, everybody, you need something done, buy a slave. You don't want labor-saving devices because it lowers the value of your slaves. It's like buying a car just to wreck it, or park it in Paris, which is kind of the same thing. But so we don't know what's on the other side of a free society of true liberty. I mean, that's why you got to make the case based on principle. Like the people who wanted to get rid of slavery just said, look, slavery is immoral. Only human beings is immoral, which it bloody well is. And those of us who are looking for voluntary solutions to social problems, we don't have to provide blueprints of exactly how society works in the absence of coercion. If some woman is getting beaten up, we don't have to sit there and say, oh, yeah? Well, who's she going to date if she leaves this guy? No. That's not the point. The point is we've got to have some principles about how we approach these things. And for me, the non-aggression principle, like do not initiate force against others. Self-defense is perfectly fine. I think not morally required, but certainly morally legitimate. I mean, that's the juicy stuff. That's the good stuff. That's where human progress is when we continue to expand the moral law. We expanded it to knock down aristocracy. We expanded it to knock down slavery. We got to just keep whittling away at it. And there's a lot of people who want to go the other way and say, we got to give the state more power. Now the state can solve all inequalities. And now we got to get rid of the family. And we got to get rid of structural this and everything that. And the only way you can do that is giving the state more and more and more power. I'm willing to live with economic, quote, inequality. That's totally fine for me. What I don't want to live with is the massive political inequality where some people in the government can point guns at everyone and try to create a utopia one bullet at a time. Long rambling speech, but there you go. Good luck.
I've had a lot of evolutionary psychologists and evolutionary biologists on the show recently, and I've got more to come. And upon reading and exposing myself and the audience to more of that, what I'm struck by is our ability to adapt, right? We're the most adaptable creature that's ever existed.
We're the only creature on all 7 continents, right?
Yeah. And I worry that the increased convenience of the modern world and the detachment from having to do things and an increasing rhetoric of being told that we don't have agency or sovereignty over what we do or what we achieve, whilst still holding in our minds that there are some people who do require help, the person with spina bifida and the disabled ramps need making and such so on and so forth. It makes me worried that we are becoming less us, less human, less of who we are as a species. And I said this at the beginning of the pandemic, that it's very rare that there's something which happens across the globe at the same time, like World Cup, the Olympic opening ceremony, and that's pretty much it. Like, it doesn't even rain everywhere on the planet at the same time. Like, I now know what it feels like to be scared in my house of a pandemic, going outside, and scared for my family, the same way as you do, the same way as someone in China does, the same way as someone in Russia does. You know, there's that quote from a ex-president that talks about how united we would be as a species and forget all of our differences if we were invaded by an alien threat.
Yeah, Paul Krugman, I think, had that as an argument as well.
Thank you. So my point there is, like, that kind of, it felt like there was some good stuff being done and we were kind of being reminded a little bit, but that was contrasted and framed against such a lack of that, such a lack of understanding that we have sort of control and that we have agency and stuff like that. And again, the amount of complexity that you need to hold in your mind at one time to be able to get all of these. It doesn't surprise me that it's difficult and it's challenging, but as you mentioned earlier on, there's some pretty smart minds in this world. If they were applying their thoughts to the correct problems, I'm reading, just about to finish Toby Ord's The Precipice on existential risk, and that again just highlights, like, the best minds on the planet right now are working out how to get people to click on ads. They're not working out how to,
or you know, instead of building bridges or coming up with ways to get us all as paid passengers to Mars, they're trying to figure out how to milk one more derivative dollar out of the Fed's manipulation of interest rates, and they've been completely parasitical off central banking. And it's like
deleting your YouTube channel, Stefan. That's what they're spending their time doing. But yeah, it just all of this stuff. It there's complexity. There's this detachment from who we are. There's this hypernormal stimuli that's going on, and again, it's easy for me to see how a conspiracy theory, and there'll be some degree of unfortunate situation and malign intent and perverse incentives and all of this sort of stuff that's going on. But there has to be some sort of unifying life principles that people can rely on. There has to be something that people can fall back to. And as far as I can see, that is kind of sovereignty and an agency. So we got sort of 10 minutes or so left. We've highlighted...
Oh, can I do one little thing on that? Just one little thing. I'll keep it brief.
Hit me.
So yeah, to me, the great advantages in human life is when we realize that the personal is the universal. Like, you know, you get a rock, you open your hand, it drops to the ground, right? And then when you see, okay, that's gravity. Well, gravity is universal. And, you know, lickety split, we can send a man to the moon and we can send a probe to Mars, right? Because we get that the personal is the universal. Now, this is, I mean, you know, some people think I'm a smart guy. Maybe there's some of that to it. But what I am is somebody who takes the personal and makes it the universal. So when I was a kid, and when you were a kid, what were we told? Use your words, not your fists. What were we told in the kindergarten? Don't push kids, don't take their stuff, don't, you know, use force or whatever, right? And when you have a conflict with another kid, you end up in a fight, you each point at each other and say, he started it, because, you know, it was considered legitimate to use some force in self-defense, right? Some kid comes running at you with your rock, you can trip him up, right? You got your self-defense. So you've got your, you know, and don't take other kids' stuff, right? You got your own little cubby hole, your name on it, and that's your stuff. You shouldn't take other people's stuff. So what do you got there? You got the non-initiation of force, non-aggression principle. You got property rights. You got self-defense. Now,
kindergarten, it's a microcosm for the real world.
Right. The same way that exactly the same force that has your rock drop to the ground can keep a satellite in geosynchronous orbit around the world. Now, so for me, like, what if everything's just a whole lot simpler than we think it is? And what if complication is a way of having us succumb to power? Oh, it's such a complicated rat's nest of syllogisms, I guess I'll just obey, right? Like, we all understand that if, you know, you and me and someone else go out for dinner and we vote that you pay, that's not fair, right? Say, well, but it's democracy, man. We outnumber you. And we get, you know, if two men want to rape a woman and they all vote on it, you know, we get that the majority does not equal ethics. So, and what if all of these principles that we teach to 4-year-olds, that we learn as children, what if we just take them like Newton did with the apple? Everything's falling. The sun is falling around the Andromeda Galaxy, or the Milky Way. The Earth is falling around the sun. The moon is falling around the Earth. Like, what if everything is falling? What if the personal is the universal? Oh, well, that's the birth of the modern world. And what if the same is true with ethics as it is with physics? Okay, that's my big thing.
Yeah, but man, I like it. But the increasing complexity from rock from hand to ground to spaceship from Earth to moon is the equivalent of kindergarten, keep your stuff in your locker, don't punch Billy, to let's try and run a country.
But it's the same principles. That's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. It's the same principles. Once you say that the rock falling is everything and everyone and it's universal, then you get all the complexity, but the complexity is based upon simple principles. In other words, if you get your basic principles, like, Darwin's evolution, you talk to these evolutionary biologists, right? You get a couple of basic principles. If this random mutation better adapts you to your environment, it's more likely to replicate, blah, 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 right? That's a simple principle. It's been called one of the greatest ideas in the history of the world. Now, from that simple principle, you get, well, an inordinate number of beetles, as we know, but you get a massive complexity of life, but just from kind of simple principles. And in the same way, some basic, speed of light is constant. Boom. Oh, my God. Speed of light is constant. We get Hiroshima, nuclear power, Chernobyl. We get like a complete understanding of how the universe functions at an atomic level. I mean, that's incredible stuff. So you take a couple of simple principles, you get complexity, but you actually don't get complexity if you don't have those simple principles. If you look back when people thought, oh, the world is flat and the sun and the moon and stars all roll around the earth, and they believed all of that stuff, and it got really, really complicated, right? They couldn't figure out why Mars would swing backwards if the Earth was the center of the universe, right?
Have you seen the old aerial diagram of how the ancient astronomers presumed that the planet moved to account for that? Have you seen this? And it looks like a sketch, with the looping
it's
back
called the Ptolemaic system, like all these circles within circles, and then boom, you put the sun at the center, and it all falls into place, right? And so when things get too complex, it's usually because we've forgotten our simple principles, or we've said they only go so far. Not stealing, not using force. Well, that's fine for kindergarten. But when it comes to foreign policy, things are completely different. I can't go and buy a car in your name. But when it comes to signing up generations of future unborn children to international bankster slavery, oh yeah, we can totally sign promissory notes and treasury notes, which they have to pay off. Like, what if the personal was the universal and all the simple ethics we learned, like that old little everything I learned at kindergarten? But what if that was the case? That would be morally, it would rewrite our entire society to say no initiation of the use of force, property rights, don't steal, like my big ethical system, universally preferable behavior. You are not allowed, and this is proven within the system, no theft, no rape, no assault, no murder. Right? Those are the basic things that the moral system bans. What if that's like Newton, the apple falls on him, he's like, oh my God, we're all falling, and we get to go to Mars. Because we keep it from simple principles, you can get great complexity. From simple rules of spelling and grammar, you can get Shakespeare. But if you can keep the rules simple, you get great positive complexity. But the more complex the rules become, as you're pointing out now, we're all just burning up our brains here trying to figure out how not to get deplatformed. Some of us more successfully than others, right?
Exactly. Well, let's wait until this goes live.
We don't have any simple rules. The simple rule should be, if your speech is legal, shut up, I'm here. If you're not doing death threats or bomb threats or direct incitements to violence, speech is legal. That should be as simple as it is, right? But now it's like, oh, yes, but this group and that group and this group. And it's like, then we lose all of the joyful complexity of our conversations because we're not going with simple legal speech is fine.
It adds, as you increase that complexity, and that, what was the name of the map again that I was talking about?
The Ptolemaic?
Ptolemaic.
Circles within circles.
Yeah. So the Ptolemaic map, if you just Google that, you'll see this hilarious image of how ancient astronomers, before they understood that the sun was at the center of the solar system, they had this increasingly complex answer, right, for how everything worked. And
the tax code.
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking is whether or not a company, to loop it right back, bit of foreshadowing in the beginning, a company like YouTube, who is going to increase the complexity in their system by involving themselves in defining the messages that are permitted and are not permitted. I think the analogy is between the difference of being a utility like a water company or being a broadcaster like a TV company, whether or not you're culpable for what goes on your site, and then how much you should step over that line outside of just law, and etc., etc. I'm wondering whether or not that doesn't scale for very long. I'm wondering whether or not that becomes the snake that eats itself type thing, because they've got to increasingly infringe on more and more. As soon as you say there's this Facebook thing at the moment, boycott Facebook, and advertisers pulling their work.
You get 500 companies lining up at Facebook's door to demand them to crack down on what's called hate speech or whatever, right? I mean, that's not good, man. That's not good.
And I think Mark Zuckerberg's got until the 10th of July or the 13th of July to deliver some promise to, I don't know, all of this stuff, like all of this, the extra layers of complexity. First off, anyone that's ever run a business understands what a diseconomy of scale is. At the very, very least, they need to pay the person that presses the delete Stefan Molyneux's channel button. And if you're then going to scale that over time, there's probably going to be some meetings about, is it this, is it that? That's a lot of wasted talent, money, time, resources, all this sorts of stuff. And I think, I wonder what the shelf life is for an increasingly sort of autocratic, parentally top-down approach to what was originally the beautiful utopia that was free information online.
Well, and who can handle that kind of power? I couldn't. I doubt you could. Who could handle that kind of power to say what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to be said in society? Because it's funny, because they seem to be going after conservatives, and they will often misidentify me as a conservative, and I'm not, but they say, oh, that's so conservative, but you understand that thinking that you know that we've reached the end of our moral progress as a species, and we absolutely know what is evil and what is good, and we know who the bad actors are, we know what all the terrible ideas are, and there's no capacity for debate at the fringes, that is megalomaniacal and narcissistic to the degree that you'd be thrown into an asylum in a sane society if you had that perspective. Look, their ideas out there I consider absolutely revolting, repulsive, and reprehensible. If you're going to say, oh, well, incitement to violence is bad, what about all the people in the media and the political system who started goddamn wars over false information, weapons of mass destruction and sarin gas and chemical attacks in Syria and all of this kind of garbage, right? Those people all have their social media accounts. You know what I've never done? I may have made a couple of mistakes in my 15-year public career. Never started any wars. Never started any wars that got 500,000 innocent people killed in Iraq, and used depleted uranium weapons that have virtually genetically destroyed entire cities like Fallujah. I've never done any of that stuff. Now, those people can have all of the social media accounts that they want. But if I stop bringing up IQ, ooh, that apparently is worse than a war crime for people. So you can't ever apply this stuff from a philosophical point consistently. I loathe communism. I loathe socialism. I loathe fascism. But you can have there are thousands of communists, open communists, teaching in American universities and Canadian universities and Western universities. They're taking people's tax dollars and they are preaching a doctrine that is highly toxic, highly dangerous, has led to the deaths of 100 million people. Philosophy, rational philosophy, has led to the deaths of 0 people. But Marxists they're perfectly comfortable, right? Even though they profess an ideology. I'm debating one later tonight at 8 p.m. in case anybody wants to drop by at freedomain.com. But ideas that are provably a slaughterhouse of human history. 2.5 times more people killed by communists than by Nazis, who were National Socialists, by the way, and not even on the right. So communists can not only have their Twitter accounts and they can spew a toxic ideology that's resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of people, but they can be gainfully employed in universities and nobody's protesting them. And as you point out, or as people have pointed out, no Karl Marx statues are getting torn down these days. It's only Christians, right? Which kind of tells you where these people are coming from. But you can't ever apply this stuff consistently and in a rational format, which means you're going to end up having to pick and choose who you ban. And we all know that bias is very strong and very powerful. So there are ideas out there I find reprehensible, and the best cure for them is to have them go out and speak their stuff, engage in debate, and have their ideas disproven. But if people are afraid of ideas coming out, they're not actually afraid of the speakers. They're afraid that their fellow citizens, or maybe even they themselves, will have no intellectual ammunition with which to rebut these ideas. And that's a problem of education. You can't solve it by playing whack-a-mole with people who do actually think.
What's the shelf life that you think for this current iteration of what's going on, if you were to put your money where your mouth is, walk into the bookies?
Well, it really depends what happens in America in November.
What's your prediction there?
Tough call, man. I was very confident about Trump, even in 2015, but the social media plus demographic plus the deaths of older people who tend to be more conservative has really changed. Trump only won by 70,000 votes, right? I get from an electoral college standpoint, it was a landslide, but from a head count standpoint, it's very narrow. But I think that the far left erupting into the kind of violence that you saw, in Chaz and what was called CHOP and so on, where you had like murders and all forms of like terrible things going on, and statues coming down and these riots, that is really scaring the hell out of people. And there's very little that persuades more than fear, which is why people use media. The media uses fear so much. So I haven't really done that much work on the election. I did on the last one. I did for the Canadian election, but I almost don't need to, because people are going to look at something like Chaz, right? So Chaz is incredible because you had a little lab experiment, a little inoculation, because they want to steal property, they want to enable criminals, and it's going to be a complete disaster. So you have this little, you get a little smallpox injection, cures you from smallpox forever. So here we've had, for the first time in human history, a live stream of the revolution, a little microcosm of the revolution, and people can see what kind of sick shit goes on in these situations.
What's the implication of that for voters?
Well, the implication of that is people are going to be pretty scared because, the one thing why is Trump so hated? Because he's anti-communist. Because his major mentor was a fervent anti-communist, and the guy understands how dangerous communism. His wife survived a communist country. You don't think she's talking about what the hell's going on at the moment? Of course she is. In the same way that all of the people who fled to America from the Romanians and Yugoslavians, they're all terrified at the moment because they're all like, man, it's like Romania in 1946. It's 2 years before they took over. Scared shitless. And, sorry, here I am swearing on your show, but, and there's no place to run, right? Where are you going to run? England? Come on. That's not going to help you, right? So I think that people are, the communications technology, which is showing what happens when you get communism, is going to scare people into, we have to go really hard in getting this stuff under control. I don't know I would love the universities to be defunded. I think it should be voluntary, all that kind of stuff, right? But we have a big indoctrination and education problem in the West. This long march through the institutions that the communists did starting in the 1960s. They control most of the major organs of communication outside of, this wilderness out here, so to speak. And they are, pretty ruthlessly shutting down dissenting voices. Are people mad? Me, because I had a couple of conversations with Noam Chomsky? Well, of course not. It's because I am relentlessly focused on exposing the evils of communism. And there are a lot of lefties in these organizations. And I think it's much more to do with that than anything else. So people are going to face a pretty stark choice. And people, of course, across the West should look at Chaz, should look at America and say, it's not just there. It's all over. And we got to be robust. The long summer of relaxation is kind of over. And we got to get on some snowshoes and get moving. Yeah,
well, it does definitely just feel a little bit like winter's coming, and it'll be such an inflection point toward the end of this year. And the mad thing is, kind of doesn't really matter what happens. If Trump does get reelected, it is going to be crazy. I have no idea what happens if Biden gets elected. I feel like Trump is rip the Band-Aid off. Biden is slow descent into sepsis.
Yeah, well, it may not be that slow. The consequences of 70 million Trump supporters who are all heavily armed being told what to do by a bunch of jackbooted thugs from the state we've seen that before in American history and world history, and it's not a pretty place to go. We saw that before, of course, in Germany in the 1920s. So where you had this very strong right-wing response to an incipient communist takeover of the German parliament. And, we're going to try and keep the conversation going as long as humanly possible, because I don't look particularly good in a helmet.
That's a really good point that I'd quite like to finish on. It's a callback to the episode I did with Andrew Doyle. And what he was talking about there was the reason that he mocks the far left as much as he does is because he fears the far right. He has a real, genuine fear of the far right. And inevitably, like throwing a ball against a wall, the harder that you throw it, the harder it bounces back. And that often tends to kind of be the sensation that's going on. And Douglas Murray's quote, his famous quote that says, when the barbarians are at the door, we'll be debating about what gender they are.
Yeah. Well, that is the blowback that occurs if we can't have conversations. We've had some jokes and some laughs, but in all seriousness, of course, the loss of something like my channel, unfortunately, is going to radicalize people, because I was a voice for reason and peace and negotiation, and I still am a voice for reason and peace and negotiation. But there are people who are going to inevitably take that, despite what I say, right, and say, well, we gave it a shot, man. 15 years of philosophy wiped out. These guys are playing for keeps. And it is an really unfortunate situation. The left always goes too far. Look, they had their nice little setup in Chaz. It could have turned into a Copenhagen-style little enclave that could have gone on for decades. But no, what do? They go and threaten the mayor. The person who was on their side, who controls the police. They go and threaten Jenny. And then, boom, they're done, right? Because they don't know when to stop. Far more money is being sent to the poor than ever existed when socialism was developed. Like 10 to 20 times more money is being sent to the poor than existed in the world when socialism was developed, because of the rise in GDP in the 20th century. It's still not enough. They still need more. They simply don't have any clue when to stop. There is no enough for the left. Now, when people are looking for, you got free speech, you get your free speech, you stop.
55 ordering Domino's, and you'd be so happy to get that Domino's. Also in college, you can just take eating like shit. Like nowadays, if I eat like shit, I pay for it for the next 2 days. But in college, you just pack it away and never even think about it again. But I remember that late night Domino's was just it was the best. When you were hungry and there was no other game in town, and you were like, fuck it. And they always had, you'd find some deal. Or you'd be like, give me 16 pizzas for $9 or whatever. And just fucking me and my college buddies just fucking pounding it away.
And you're like, the toppings are free. I'll take all the toppings. Whatever you'll throw on that thing, I'll eat it.
Dude, that was yeah, just well, what do you have? Put it on there. I remember that being the thing that I just could not adjust to about being in this shit town. Because I went from, living in New York City my entire life to being in Oneonta, this tiny little town. And maybe not by tiny town standards, but by New York City standards, it's shit. And I remember if it was if you called, if it was 12:01, Domino's wasn't answering their phone anymore, and there's just nothing. There's nothing open. And I remember being, because I was an idiot. I was 19, and so I wouldn't plan ahead. And I'd just be like, oh shit, I forgot to eat dinner or whatever, and I'm starving at midnight, and there's nothing in my fridge. And it was just well, then you can't eat. That's that's life.
I got no choice but to drink more on an empty stomach. You leave me no choice here.
Yeah, but the drinking, didn't really, that wasn't, affected by any of it, but it would be just I'm hungry. And it'd be well, there's nothing open. And as a New York City kid, you're well, what do you mean there's nothing open? There has to be something open. I'm willing to walk 5 blocks, that's New York City. There's always something open. And that was just so foreign to me. And I just, oh my God, it was the worst. I just hated it so much. That feeling, it still stays with me. Just being starving and going to bed. And, I'm using the term starving. I'm being a little hyperbolic, but hungry.
Dude, when you're used to New York City and you're in some small town and it's closed late at night, it's hard to even wrap your head around it.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays as an adult, it's a little different. You know, you like have a stocked refrigerator and you fucking plan ahead and shit. And I also eat dinner like at a normal time with my family. But when I was a kid, it was like, I don't know. I was fucking playing Madden. I forgot to have dinner, you know, or studying. Yeah, that really wasn't what I was doing. Okay, so anyway, let's get into some things on this show. There was a couple things that I wanted to talk about. But I wanted to address some things about the Libertarian Party and my relationship to the Libertarian Party, because I saw, you know, I've been, obviously, as everyone who listens to the show knows, I've been pretty critical of Joe Jorgensen over the last week or so. And I'm
working on being actively gay and black to show my support, because it's not enough to show your support. You got to actively be these things.
Yeah. Oh, you're taking it in a different direction than me. And I got to
get some melanin, apparently. I didn't even know that was a thing, but if you want to be a human being, you need your melanin. Yeah,
well, that is true. Or at least if you want to be a Jew. It turns out you're not even a Jew. You're nothing that you thought you were.
They can have it. I don't know why they want that one so bad.
It's been a rough week, okay? Rob has found out that he's a racist, he's subhuman, and he's not even a Jew. He can't even hang his hat on that anymore. That's a lot to take away from someone in the span of 7 days. So it's really robbed of your identity. So anyway, I was posting, you know, I've posted a few times in the Mises Caucus Facebook group, because I like to kind of, you know, if I see the Libertarian Party fucking up or the caucus fucking up, I like to kind of let them know what I think. And I love those guys, and I get a lot of support in that group, and I appreciate it.
Still the best platform for discourse. So
yeah, well, I mean, compared to what? Compared to Twitter? Yeah, probably. So there were a few people who seemed to respond to me, and that were like, oh, so Dave's announced that he's not supporting the Libertarian ticket anymore. There were some people who seemed to think that I'm supporting Trump, which I'm not sure exactly how people got that impression. I mean, I did say on the Malice podcast, I said the one thing that pushes me towards supporting Trump is how much I hate the Democrats. But I didn't, let me just correct the record, if that, I didn't intend for that to be misleading. So I'm not voting for Donald Trump. I can't vote for someone who's conducted the war in Yemen for their 4 years. I'm sorry. I mean, there's some reasonable lines that you just can't cross and expect me to support you. And, you know, presiding over a genocide, to me, is one of those lines that no matter what else you do.
I was clear on Kanye, but the fucker bailed. Right after I get out here, I throw my support behind him, I get excited, and he just bailed right out.
Yeah, that's it's really disappointing. I know that was rough. On top of finding out you're a racist animal non-Jew, also Kanye bailing was just, it's been a horrific week for Rob Bernstein, everybody.
And Caitlyn said that she still wants the gig. She said she still wants to be vice president. She wants to bring her big old hog to the White House. And I still want to see that happen.
I mean, honestly, that would, just for the headlines alone, I would support that.
The world's most inclusive ticket. You got a black dude and a lady?
A black dude and a lady and a dude all rolled into one.
Everybody.
Everything you need. So anyway, I also have not decided that I'm not voting for Joe Jorgensen. I honestly don't know. I'm kind of up in the air about whether or not they'll get my vote. There's some things that I like about Joe, and there's been some things lately that that really bother me. And truthfully speaking, my attitude with voting, and what it's always been, is that I don't really think it means a lot. I live in a blue state that's going to go blue. It's not a competitive state. It doesn't mean anything. I just don't see a tremendous amount of value, particularly someone in my situation. It would mean a lot more to Joe Jorgensen if I were to just actively support her than vote for her. You know what I mean? Like the vote really doesn't mean nearly as much as the fact that I have a big platform with a lot of people who, you know, I'm somewhat influential over, and that I can, if I were just making compelling arguments. So as far as voting and just really supporting somebody, I feel like there's got to be something that I see that's valuable there. Now, for the like Tom Woods used to make this point about Ron Paul, and I thought I completely agree with him, where there'd be some libertarians who are like, I don't believe in voting. And Tom would be like, okay, so you have this guy, this older man who's like in his 70s, who's traveling all around the country. He's sleeping on fucking hotel beds instead of sleeping at home. He's away from his family. He's doing all of this to spread the message of liberty, and he's taking on everybody and being unfairly attacked by all these different people. And you can't take an hour out of your day to go vote for that guy because he's doing all this shit. You know what I mean? Like, and that completely makes sense to me. The idea that, like, if somebody is sacrificing so much and being effective and they're a true champion for your beliefs, yeah, take an hour out of your day and go fucking vote for the person. So I get that. But in order to get my vote, I got to really believe in you and what you're doing. And in order for me to support a libertarian, someone running on the Libertarian Party, I got to believe that this is for something and can actually influence people. Now,
we're becoming the ultra-left party. We're going to become the all-inclusive people who speak to the ultra-left, identity politics, and make sure that everyone feels included, and that if you're not actively taking stances towards inclusion, then you're clearly being excluded. I don't know if that's even English anymore, because this whole landscape makes no sense to me. That's the ultimate in censorship. If you don't swear your allegiance with us, you're clearly on the side of evil. I hate that shit more than anything.
And a very vague, you have to do something. We must be actively anti-racist. What exactly do you define that as? I know a whole lot of people define that as some pretty anti-liberty shit. So
what happened to principles of fairness and growing the economy for everybody so everyone can make money and live well? Let's not get lost in the fucking bullshit.
So this is my thing. It's like, if I see Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen running a campaign that I think is principled and uncompromising, and I think has the ability to convert people, the truth is that with this stuff, with that tweet that Joe Jorgensen has, and how this has gotten more attention than anything else she's done right now, for me to be like, hey, people, you got to take a look at this Joe Jorgensen lady, it would just be an embarrassment. They would take a look at her and go, oh yeah, this is the same bullshit that I'm hearing from the entire corporate press, from all of Hollywood, from all of academia, from all of like the Black Lives Matter supporters. It's like, what is this going to do? So I am still open. Listen, I grant that they are a lot better than Trump or Biden is, and there are some issues that Joe Jorgensen's really good on. But she's just, I'm still paying attention. She's got to convince me. All right, guys, let's take a quick second. I want to thank our awesome sponsor for today's show, which is Sheath Underwear. Sheath uses moisture-wicking technology to create underwear that keeps everything breathable and incredibly comfortable downstairs. Sheath's smart underwear comes in a number of different styles, including a brief with a dual pouch. It just makes everything feel good. Goes where it's supposed to. I was a little skeptical about it at first. Let me tell you, it's the best underwear I've ever owned in my life. They're really high quality. Go get a pair. You're going to be like me. You're going to end up getting 10 more pairs because they're high quality, incredibly comfortable. Sheath underwear was invented by a soldier while serving in Iraq, where, as you can imagine, things tend to get pretty hot and sticky. He developed the prototype in Iraq and raised money on Kickstarter to launch Sheath, and now they're right here supporting our show, so make sure you go support them as well. The bottom line is Sheath creates amazing underwear. If you don't love them, they have a 100% money-back guarantee off your first pair. Plus, they have an amazing line of women's underwear as well. So, to go get your new favorite pair of underwear, go to sheathunderwear.com and use the promo code PROBLEM20 for 20% off your order. They ship anywhere in the world. That's sheathunderwear.com, promo code PROBLEM20 for 20% off your order. All right, let's get back into the show. Now, as far as the Libertarian Party goes, I feel like a lot of what happens in different circles in the Libertarian Party, and this is just me speculating, I don't know for sure, but I feel that a lot of it is done specifically to drive our people out of the party. Like, they want to do these things to make it like this is hopeless and we're leaving, and that really motivates me to stay and to take over. And the truth is that we've only been doing this project for a very short amount of time. It's really only been a year that I've been actively, supporting the Libertarian Party. Like I had a presidential nominee who I was pushing for. Now, Jacob Hornberger didn't end up winning, but he came damn close. The Mises Caucus didn't get their presidential candidate and they didn't get their chair candidate, but they came damn close. And I'm like, no, you know what? Instead of walking away, I'm just going to redouble my efforts. I'm going to be a lot more serious about finding candidates who I support the next time around. And I'm going to encourage people a lot more once I find those candidates to really get behind them. I'm still down with the Mises Caucus cause. I think I love Michael Heiss. I talk to that guy often, and I think he's like right focused where he should be. So I'm not leaving because the former chair will tweet out something stupid. That's just handing it over to them. And why should we do that when we're winning? We're the fastest growing caucus. We're literally, the reason why
will ride again.
That's right. The Meacocks will rise again. That's why, but the reason why there's all this fucking shit coming at us is because they're scared of the fact that if this momentum continues, it's not even a question that the Mises Caucus will take over the party. They've already become the most dominant, the most passionate, the most active caucus in the Libertarian Party. So I'm not going anywhere. And truthfully speaking, a lot of the kind of people coming at me, let's say, never really started coming at me until I was actively in the Libertarian Party and pushing candidates and things like that. And so that, just my personality type, if they think they're going to come at me like that and I'll go, well, this is hopeless, I'm going to leave. Like, no, fuck you. Now I'm going to stay and fucking take over. So that's where I'm at with this whole thing. However, let me also make this clear. I am not, because people were like, and by the way, I should say, the vast majority of people that I have interacted with are, pretty supportive of what I'm saying on all this stuff. But a few people were like, I don't get it, Dave. Like, what's your end goal here? You've criticized Joe Jorgensen 4 times this week or something like that. Like, aren't you for the Libertarian Party? And it's like, well, yeah, I am, but I'm not just going to blindly support everything the Libertarian Party does. And I'm not just going to bite my tongue when I see them fucking up. I'm going to stay here.
Not just that, they're now pushing the absolute worst thing in our culture, which is if you don't swear allegiances to these weird things, then you're inherently evil. No, we're on the side of critical thinking, of independent thoughts. Like, there's literally nothing in the entire political landscape that I hate more. And now you've defined our political party around that. So no. Yes.
And the whole reason I'm here and not with the Republican Party is because I don't just swear allegiance to a party. If I was just like, oh, no matter what the party says, even if they say something that I detest, I'll bite my tongue about it and just support the party like that, then I wouldn't be in the Libertarian Party. This goes back to the whole debate that I had with Sarwalk, which was why his point was just so stupid. Like, he was saying that if Dick Cheney runs, I should vote for him, or if Adolf Hitler runs, I should vote for him because they're in our party. Because the whole point of the Libertarian Party is that you care about principles, not just about party. If you just cared about party, you'd go with one of the ones that can actually win.
Yeah.
We're over here because we're like, no, these two parties have sold out their principles or just don't have any principles, and so we're going to do a different party where there might be some. And the reason why I'm staying with the Libertarian Party is because there's still a much better shot at actually getting them to be a party of principle than there is the Democrats or the Republicans. But I'm not going to stop speaking my mind. Number one, I don't think that's helpful. Number two, I don't want to. And number three, that's all I bring to the table. Like, if I don't do that, then what value do I have? I mean, that's the whole reason why all you guys listen to this show is because I tell you the truth as I see it. If I don't do that, what the fuck is the point of it? Then I'm just like a political animal. I'm like a fucking some type of political, organizer or something. Like, I'm not good at that. I'm just good at telling the truth.
Here's what we got to do, Davey Smith. For next year, well, it's actually not going to be next year. I guess it's going to be in 4 years from now. We'll create the Meat Cocks Rise Again. We'll have the slogan, no more fairy shit. And that's what we're going to ride on. No more fair, like the Federal Reserve, that's fairy shit. We're getting rid of it. This leftist liberal stuff, that's fairy shit. We're getting rid of it. We'll go down to that fucking convention. We'll throw comedy shows. We'll bring the whole gang down, all the listeners. We'll get those fuckers to vote, and we'll get rid of this old guard of, of assholes.
There we go. There's the fucking there we go. There's the plan. At least that's the rough outline of the plan.
The Meatcocks rise again. We'll just actually show up. That's all we got to do. We didn't show up last time. We're like, you know what? You guys have this under control. There's this fake virus thing. We're gonna hang out in Jersey, but fuck that. Next time we'll actually show up. Fans will come because we'll put on some gigs, and that's it. They will lose.
There we go. So we're fucking, I am redoubling down my efforts. I'm still supporting the Mises Caucus. I'm still supporting the LP, but I'm also gonna slap them around when they need it. The way a good big brother would. If you're fucking acting like a fairy, you're gonna get a couple slaps across the face until you straighten out. So there you go. That's the plan. Now, in that spirit, I'm not going to stop being critical of Joe Jorgensen for that dumbass fucking tweet, which don't get me twisted. I don't think it was done. First of all, I don't think Joe Jorgensen tweeted it. That's number one. But that's not a good excuse. That's not a good excuse. In fact, that might be even worse. Like, you got to be in control of the messaging of your campaign, right? You're running for president and you're trying to spread these ideas. You got to be aware of something that's going to cause this much, outrage.
Donald Trump, bad president, but he writes his own tweets. At least he's got the dignity to show up on Twitter and speak his own mind.
That is a great point. Nobody's ever even had the thought that somebody else might be writing Trump's tweets.
Wouldn't that be great if he did have a writer's room and he didn't write any of them?
What if they just came to him like one day and they were like, Donald Trump, you tweeted so-and-so. He goes, I don't have a Twitter. What? What's Twitter? And they're just like, sir, you've tweeted 500,000 times in the last few years. I don't even own a computer. I don't know what you're talking about. I read novels and just that. Okay, so in this spirit, I am going to continue to be critical. And where it's now, again, like I said, that was a dumb ass tweet. It wasn't. I don't think Joe Jorgensen is a secret Marxist or like some shit like that. It's just dumbass fucking pandering, and some idiot on our campaign thought it was a good idea, or possibly someone on our campaign is not a big fan of, let's say, our types and our influence on the Libertarian Party and wanted to piss us off. I think that's possible too.
I think the wanted to piss us off is really interesting, but also appealing to this ultra left base is what just destroyed the Democratic Party. So let's not look at the trends in society and go, hey, if I appeal to this group of people with the gender, identity, whatever the fuck your college terms are for what these idiots are doing, whatever that whole thing is, let's not try and appeal to them. Let's not make that the base of the party or what our platform is. We've got better ideas.
It's the worst. It will help everybody. Yes, I agree with you. This is not the type of thing you say when you have actual ideas, and they're the worst group to try to appeal to. They will return they will have the least returns of any
point
group.
Point of privilege.
yeah. That's not where we're going to find our home. Okay. So one of the other things that I've had a few people say to me is that I didn't address her follow-up tweet, which she of course had a follow-up tweet because there was she opened up this shitstorm with her dumbass initial tweet. And the reason, so first off, when I recorded the first episode about it, she hadn't responded yet. It was right after she had the initial tweet, or at least I hadn't seen it yet. I think it happened while I was recording, so that's why I didn't respond to it then. I think I briefly mentioned it with Malice on one of those episodes, but her follow-up tweet, and the Libertarian Party, the official page, also, tweeted a follow-up tweet, which was that, something like, because I guess they got flooded with a lot of people like, pointing out that the Black Lives Matter, the organization, is run by Marxists who are straight up like call themselves trained Marxists and are pushing like a communist agenda, and that's not very libertarian. And so she followed up by saying, supporting Black Lives Matter does not mean that I support any organization with ties to Marxists. It means that I support the movement. Okay, so people were saying that I didn't address that tweet, and the problem is that tweet sucked. That was a terrible cover. So first of all, it's like, you're going to say, okay, I don't support the organization. I support the movement that's named after the organization. I think we can all see what the problems with that are. That like, oh, okay. I mean, if there was like a fucking, you know, some organization with a bunch of Nazis, and then a movement came up and called themselves the same name, and also had a bunch of Nazis in it, and also, you know, was doing all this other shit, I think people would be like, yeah, I don't really want to split hairs here between the movement. This is all kind of problematic, to borrow the leftist language. But the problem with that, of course, is, right, if you say you don't, like, first of all, the tweet was vague as shit. What do you mean by racism? What do you mean by anti-racism? What do you mean by Black Lives Matter? Like, what is it? What do you mean by we must? It's just so unclear that it was almost designed to create all of these problems for her. So it was stupid as much as anything else. But to say, okay, I don't support the organization, the Marxist organization, but I do support the movement. It's like, okay, well, what do we count as the movement? I mean, you're saying the people in the streets? Okay, well, there have been legitimately peaceful protesters out there, okay? There have also been riots in cities across the country, also calling themselves Black Lives Matter. The vandalism, I mean, drive through New York City, the shit that's spray painted on top of all these like little businesses is Black Lives Matter.
And they killed kids.
Huh?
They've killed kids.
Yes, like kids.
They're responsible probably for more black kid live deaths than the cops, if I had to guess. Well, I don't know what the numbers are of black kids that get killed by cops annually, but Black Lives Matter in 3 months are putting up good numbers.
Yeah, right. So in the last 3 months, they've been responsible for more black deaths than the cops have. And that's not to justify one or the other. It's all horrible. But what are we talking about? Are we talking about the riots where people are screaming Black Lives Matter? Are we talking about the looting where they're spray painting Black Lives Matter inside of businesses? Are we talking about seizing other people's property in Chaz, or, you know, where they're spray painting Black Lives Matter all over the place? It's pretty fucking vague. Are we talking about, I mean, look, so anyway, this is the post that I made in the Mises caucus the other day, is that I was like, I got shit from a couple people, you know, mostly people caught my back in that caucus, which I appreciate, but a few people, and, you know, people of note, like I know Spike Cohen, who's the vice presidential nominee, he was critical of me, and Joshua Smith, who was the Mises Caucus candidate for chair, he was critical of me for a comment that I made about 4 years ago. And what I said was, more or less, but this was the effect of what I said. What I said was, I'm largely sympathetic to the alt-right. I think the left view of you is unfair, as their view of everything is unfair. But they're, you know, if you're in an organization where people are marching around with swastikas on flags or on their bodies, then I'm not going to be a part of what you're a part of. The swastikas represent the Nazis who slaughtered my family. There's something along the lines of that. Now, of course, I was, you know, let's say the first part of that was isolated when I said I'm sympathetic to the alt-right. But, you know, whatever. It's, you know, so like that was just what was put out there. And I got criticized by a few of these people for it. But the point I was making was that, you know, if Joe Jorgensen had my level of precision and had said what I said, I don't think any of us would have a problem with it. If Joe Jorgensen had said, I'm sympathetic to Black Lives Matter because I think police brutality is an outrage. Police power needs to be reined in, and we can't accept that things like this happen in our society. However, I can't support any organization where people are looting, assaulting people, seizing private property, or are associated with Marxists. I would have given her a standing ovation. I would have actually stood up and cheered if she had said that. I think that would have been an excellent thing to say. You can sympathize with a group of people because of what they're outraged against, you know? And then, you know, for people who are like, well, are you equating the alt-right with Black Lives Matter? Well, I'm not saying they're the same thing. I mean, clearly there are differences, but what is it really that people hated about the alt-right? It's like, okay, well, there was a bunch of racists associated with them. All right. I mean, are there not racists associated with Black Lives Matter? When you see them saying that white silence is violence. See, here's the fundamental problem with the anti-racist crowd is it's almost impossible to achieve before you just start being racist in the other direction. Like, racism is like this. First off, everybody's a little bit racist. It's probably impossible to be completely, devoid of any like prejudice based on race at all, whether on a subconscious level or consciously. But it's like there's this middle ground where if you get right to the middle ground, then you go, I'm not racist. This theoretical, which I'm not sure anybody really is. And then you go, I'm going to be anti-racist. You pretty much start being racist toward the other side. So, if you were to see a movement amongst white people where they were asking black people to get on their knees and kiss their feet and apologize for their inherent, sin of being a black person. If they were saying that if black people don't say anything, that's the equivalent of violence, and also somehow that black people should shut the fuck up and listen when white people are talking, everybody would see